Police officers of Reddit. Who's the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? Hey everybody, welcome back to the internet. So we recently had the question of really stupid criminals, and now we get to deal with smart ones. I worked with this one guy who had a lengthy record. He had a system for getting released if he got caught. After committing a crime, if the police were in pursuit and he knew he was about to get cornered, he would act insane. His girl would play along with it, telling the police that he was off his medication. The police would arrest him, but then send him to a mental ward with papers instructing the ward to release to police once he was cleared. Once he was in the mental ward, he would cause a distraction that would make the person attending the desk with the file cabinets to leave said cabinet. He would then crawl to the file cabinet, look for his release to police papers, and then would literally eat the papers. When the psych ward evaluators decided that he was stable enough to be released, there would be no instructions to send him to the police, and he would be released to the general public. He did this about 10 times until police officers noticed him back on the streets. This stunt forced the state to change their procedure for detaining mentally unstable suspects. Hey, I mean, not a bad strategy. You ever lock yourself into a contract, you can just eat the contract too. My favorite was the guy who stole a post office mailbox off the street, repainted it, and then put it right next to the deposit box at a bank, and hung an out of order sign on the deposit box. All the businesses came along and dropped off their deposits in the mailbox. Now I know some of these stories might sound like they would be a good idea because these are smart criminals, but just keep in mind they all ended up getting caught in the end anyway, so I wouldn't try it. Most of them are really stupid, so this guy isn't really a criminal mastermind, but here goes. He wanted to rob a jeweler on our main city street. So he found out the flat besides the jewelry was empty, and he hid there. For 2 weeks he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night. Massive headache for the police and business. We turn up to see nothing there. Nothing on cameras. Thought it was just a fluke, so the jewelers turned off the alarm system, and said they'd wait until morning to get a new one installed, or that one rewired because something wasn't right. As soon as he heard that, and the police leaving, he tore down the wall. He'd already been working on this apparently, and robbed the place, taking his sweet time. Escaped without anyone noticing anything for hours, until the jewelers came back in the morning. Then he tried to resell something he stole, which had a serial number on it, and got caught. So not that smart after all. Good effort though. Yeah, that's true. I don't get how people can really get away with stealing like tons of jewelry or gold or stuff like that, because it's like, sure it all has a lot of value, but now how exactly are you going to sell it without raising any red flags? A friend of my brother moved to Israel, where for a period of time it was, or is, acceptable to drive with an American driver's license. He was pulled over for speeding, and when asked for his license, gave the officer his Costco card. The exchange apparently went something like this. The officer says, "Costco? What is Costco?" He says, "It's the state I'm from." He says, "That sounds made up." He says, "There are lots of states you probably haven't heard of. Have you heard of Arkansas? How about Idaho?" He says, "I guess not." He says, "Well, I'm from the small state of Costco." The officer didn't have a response and wound up writing the ticket to someone with a Costco driver's license. The friend framed the ticket and still has it hanging on his wall. Well, apparently if you're from Costco you get away with speeding, so... Well, there was this one guy, we'll call him Jack. Now, Jack stole stuff, but also involved a lot of people. First time he was planning to steal a whole bunch of cars, all luxury cars. So what he did was he got his people to call 911, etc., from all different places and countries to tell them that car theft was taking place in multiple places. Oh, he also used a few people each time, so it was different voices, people, locations, etc., so the police went each time. Until he actually did the crime, then no one came. He was never caught. When the owner of those cars came, the police didn't believe him. 10 out of 10 genius right there. Yeah, something I've always thought about is like, anytime there's a massive event, like almost all of the cops in the area go to that. So like if you were planning on committing some crime, wouldn't it be beneficial to have like 4 or 5 crimes going on all around the city at once and just like outnumber the police? The story goes like this. A homeowner walks out one morning to drive to work, only to find his car missing. He reports the car stolen to police. A few days later, his car is sitting back in front of his house. When he gets inside, he finds a note. It was an apology that said the thief was in dire need of quick transportation, and so he borrowed the first car he found with the keys inside. The writer noted the sticker on the car for the local sports team, and just so there were no hard feelings, he left 4 tickets to an upcoming game in the glove box for the homeowner and his family. So the homeowner and his family attend the game, but when they return home they found the house had been ransacked and all items of value are gone. Wow, way to let your guard down. Man, I'd almost be too embarrassed to call the police on that one. There was a guy with over 50 speeding charges, with the name Prawo Jazdi. He was in a different car with a different disguise every single time. Eventually, after the government set up a special task force to take down this guy, they realized that Prawo Jazdi meant driver's license in Polish. It was 50 different people. The police just wrote down their name as Prawo Jazdi, every time someone with a Polish driver's license was caught speeding. Sounds like the cops all outsmarted themselves there. Here's one. I knew this guy back in the early 80s. Let's call him Jim. Well, he really wanted this high-powered superbike, but he knew he could never afford it. So what he did was to take drive to London and scout it about for a few days, until he found that particular model parked outside a house. He goes back that night with a slide hammer, pulls the lock, and steals the bike. He gets it home, puts it in his garage, and completely strips it so that the only thing left is the frame and the bottom half of the engine, which he drags into the weeds at the bottom of his garden. Then he pours fuel over it and burns it a bit. A few weeks pass, and weeds have started growing over it. It's at that point he calls the cops and reports that someone had dumped the bike frame in his garden. The cops show up, and he explains that he'd just gotten back from being away and found it. The cops take the frame and note down his name and address. A few days later, the cops call him and say that the bike had been stolen from London a month or so ago, from the serial number on the bottom half of the engine and frame, and that the insurance company had classed the bike as a write-off, and had told the cops to dispose of it. Now, because the frame was found in the garden and the insurance company didn't want it, the cops were duty-bound to ask him if he wanted to keep it, or if they should throw it. So he tells them that he'd always wanted to build a bike. He gets the frame back from them, repaints it, then puts it all back together and re-registers it as Q-Reg, which is stolen and recovered. I forgot to call him Jim, didn't I? Man, some people have so much creativity when it comes to stealing stuff. Working in a home improvement store when younger, this guy came in, went to the snow blowers, took one, and went to the return desk. Said he wanted to return it but had no receipt. They told him you need a receipt, so he says, okay, I'll be back, and wheels it off to a car through the front door. He did this a few times apparently. A couple places even helped him load it back into his car. I feel like most places have cameras to stop people from doing stuff like this. So close on 20 years ago now, a guy on Australia's Gold Coast got away with a bank robbery in broad daylight. He cased the bank for a while and discovered a pattern of the bank manager arriving about 30 minutes before anyone else each morning, where he would leave the front doors unlocked so the staff could help themselves in without a key, or needing to wait for the boss to come and let them in. One morning, the crook dressed himself up for a busy day of office work and waited for the bank manager to arrive. As the manager was unlocking the doors, he made his move, entering the building and threatening the manager with a gun. He got all the details he'd need to access the vault, and so forth, and then tied the manager up and stuffed him in his office. When the staff arrived, he told them that the manager had called in sick, and that the regional office had sent him in to do the open shop thing, and no one batted an eyelid. This bank had a small walk-in vault that normally held only about 30 to 50K on any given day, but old mate had timed his robbery for the morning after business banking day, when all the local small businesses would make their end-of-week deposits, and reportedly got a score of close to 250K. Once the vault was open, he pulled his gun out and invited all the staff to enter the vault and lock them in. By this stage, the bank was due to be open, so when he went to leave, there were a number of customers waiting to get inside to do their banking. He told them all that there had been an issue with the computers, and that the tech teams had estimated it would take about 30 minutes before the issue would be resolved, and that they couldn't open until then. Then he got into his car and drove straight to the airport and flew to Hong Kong and then disappeared. To my knowledge, the cops never caught him and never managed to find the money. They knew he'd have to leave most of it in Australia somewhere, because you can only take 10K Australian in cash in any currency out of the country before custom pulls you into their interview rooms. So the assumption was that he had to have an accomplice here who would funnel the money to him slowly over time. I know I'm not really supposed to be siding with the criminals in these stories, but that's pretty clever. A homeless guy in my hometown figured out if he committed some act of petty theft, he'd get a night in jail, a warm place to sleep, and a hot meal. He'd show up, turn in his stolen goods, and that would be that. After a while, the police would just tell him to take back whatever he stole the next day. Quite the town character. See, I mean, this is just taking advantage of a completely broken system. Not a police officer, but was an RA in college. My university owned all the houses adjacent to campus. These were ran like dorms, with RAs and the same rules, which included a very strict no alcohol policy. It was a privilege to live in the houses, and priority was given to upperclassmen who were more likely to bend that rule because they were of age, and it was harder to police off-campus in houses. There was a student who went around knocking on doors saying something like, "I'm an RA and the housing director sent me for health and wellness checks." She'd find their booze, take it, and follow up with how she's doing them a favor by just giving them a warning. She wasn't actually an RA and was just keeping the booze for herself. The only reason she got found out was because she did it to an actual RA. The RA was male. They kept men and women housing separate, and just assumed he didn't know her because of that. It was only later he questioned why they had a female doing wellness checks on male housing. They did an investigation and asked other residents. Incidents dated back previous 2 years. Never found out who it was. Well, as we all know, college kids getting drunk is a very severe crime. I'm sure that never happens. Probably someone who committed a crime I never solved. With that being said, I had a guy use a sledgehammer to smash his way through a wall at a Best Buy and steal a bunch of phones and cameras. He was smart enough to wear gloves and a face mask and not touch anything he didn't have to. Alarms didn't go off until he exited out the back door, which the alarm company gets after a minute or two, and takes him like 3 or 4 minutes to call in to us, giving him a good 5-minute head start. So he was probably a few miles away before we got dispatched to it. He clearly scoped out the area before doing his deed too. Smart dude. I mean, wouldn't it be better to just go back out the way you came in, and then not have police come after you at all? A guy, let's call him Dave, I worked with told this story. He was working at a Mercedes dealership. He was sitting at his desk when this well-dressed gentleman comes in and asks if he could test drive a specific car that was parked out front. It was also a busy day. Usually they're allowed to let people test drive by themselves after they have taken some form of deposit or something. So Dave gives out the keys, the guy goes on his test drive and comes back a reasonable amount of time later. He walks in and hands off the key, gets his deposit or whatever back. This was about closing time, even possibly on a Friday. Everything is in order. Fast forward to the next business day. Dave's boss walks in and realizes that one of the Mercedes out front has gone. Dave has to explain that the car was returned and that they have the key and everything. Turns out the criminal didn't test drive, he drove somewhere to create a replica of the key, and gave that replica back to the desk. He kept the real key. That smart son of a gun. I do think it is strange how easy it is to make copies of keys when stuff like this is possible. I don't know, maybe car keys are a lot more difficult to actually make copies of, but I guess if all you need is a replica to give back, then I guess it worked out. This was in the late 90s or early 2000s. A guy in my dorm came to school solely to sell drugs. He took out student loans, registered for a bunch of 300-person freshman survey courses, where he would never be missed, then literally never went to class. All he did was go to raves and concerts and keggers and sell party drugs. After the first semester, he was suspended. He wrote the usual, "I was young and dumb and in over my head" sob story, and got put on probation for a semester, so he had a repeat of the fall. At the end of the year, he was kicked out and didn't care. He made something on the order of $150,000 in return for about the $8,000 in student loans to cover a year of housing and tuition. So far as I know, he was never caught. It may have been a short-sighted maneuver in the long run, but in the short run it seemed fairly genius to effectively use federal loans to start your drug business. Well, he probably turned out more financially successful than most of the people who got degrees, so who's the real loser here? There was an incident in Fargo, North Dakota, where a guy wanted to steal electronics equipment. The store had plenty of alarms on it, and generally cutting an alarm triggers an alarm, so instead he cut all the alarms. This was before cell phones were really widespread, and alarms were usually just connected to the phone line. He found an access point to one of the phone company's big truck lines. Massive thick copper cables with tens of thousands of lines running to them. He cut through the whole thing with a circular saw, knocked out phone service to most of the town, and robbed an audio store during the ensuing chaos. There were no leads until a tip came in from another town that he'd pulled something similar. They hadn't been able to pin that to him, but had strong suspicions he'd relocated to Fargo, so the cops pay him a visit. He refused to let them in because they didn't have a warrant, so the cops left to get one without leaving anyone to watch him, and he split. When they came back, they found a saw coated in copper dust, and a lot of stolen stuff. He was in the wind for a while, but even after he got caught, he had another card to play. While being transported between prisons, he used a key he made to unlock his shackles, and climbed out of a roof vent of the bus. Man, some of these people seem like they're just like professional criminals. Like, these aren't just one-off guys who decided to rob a convenience store. These guys, like, they know what they're doing. But that is all the stories we have for today. Hopefully I didn't give anybody any ideas in this video, but if I did, you better not use my name. Anyways, that's all we've got, so thanks for watching.